It's okay, little one. I'm here now. You're not alone.
Maya Williams' whisper was barely audible over the piercing screams of the 6-month-old child, but it carried a warmth no machine or medicine in the house had managed to provide. She stood just outside the nursery, arms tense at her sides, her heart pulled with each cry that tore through the door like a siren of sorrow. Across the hallway, Edward Carver stormed toward her, his face a thundercloud.
Who gave you permission to be up here?
The house was in chaos. Nannies, nurses, and specialists had spent the last 36 hours trying and failing to soothe the infant heir to the Carver fortune. The child had cried himself, refused every bottle, rejected every lullaby except Maya's voice, which he had only heard once through a slightly cracked door.
Edward's tone turned harsh. You are a maid, not a nurse, not a nanny.
I won't allow someone as filthy as you anywhere near my child.
The words cut through the hallway like ice. 2 of the senior staff nodded in support.
And one of them, the head housekeeper with a clipped northern accent, sneered under her breath.
Let her in there and watch the tabloids feast. Billionaire lets janitor cradle his heir. He'll be ruined. Edward clenched his jaw.
His life had been under a microscope since the passing of his wife. Every move he made was scrutinized by shareholders and media alike. Trusting a low-level employee, especially a young black woman he barely knew in such a delicate situation, it felt reckless.
If you feel connected to this story, give it a like. Comment where you're watching from. Who knows? Someone nearby might be watching, too.
And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, brought to you by BUP Stories.
Maya stepped forward anyway.
Her eyes didn't flinch, though her voice wavered slightly. Mr. Carver, I'm not trying to take over, but please just give me 5 minutes.
He scoffed. Why? You think you know more than a dozen specialists?
No, Maya said quietly, but I know pain. There was a stillness in her face then, a memory rising behind her eyes. When my mother died, my little brother cried like that for hours. I stood next to him at the funeral, frozen.
I thought someone would come hold him, but no one did.
Her voice cracked, and I've never forgiven myself.
Edward's eyes narrowed. He reached out to block her from passing. You don't understand what's at stake. He's fragile, and so is everything around him. Maya gently pulled her arm away from his grasp. He doesn't need everything to be perfect. He just needs someone to show up.
The baby's cries grew louder behind the door, as if echoing her plea. After a long, tense pause, Edward exhaled.
5 minutes.
If he so much as twitches the wrong way, I'm calling security.
Maya nodded, her face steady. Thank you.
She pushed open the nursery door and stepped into the wail-filled room. The soft pastel walls did little to contain the emotional storm.
Monitors blinked. Plush animals sat abandoned. The crib stood in the center, a tiny battlefield of flailing limbs and sorrow.
She crossed the room slowly, murmuring softly.
It's okay, little one. I'm here now. You're not alone. Her arms scooped him up awkwardly at first.
Then, instinctively, she held him close, pressed his ear to her heart, and began to hum a wordless melody. Her grandmother used to sing. The cries began to falter. One hiccup, then another. His tiny fingers gripped the fabric of her blouse.
Outside, Edward leaned in. Tense, the nanny stared, then silence. Inside, Maya rocked gently in the wooden chair beside the crib.
The boy's breathing grew steady against her chest, her eyes closed, a tear slipping down her cheek, not of sadness, but of release. Behind her, the door creaked open. Edward stepped inside, slowly, as if afraid to break the moment. He looked at her, at his child, now fast asleep. Then, without a word, he sat down on the floor beside the chair, leaned forward, and buried his face in his hands. It was the first time in weeks the weight in his chest felt like it might shift. The first time he believed healing was possible. Maya, still holding the baby, whispered softly, "Sometimes a child doesn't need perfection, just presence." Edward lifted his gaze slowly. The truth of her words struck harder than any eulogy at his wife's funeral. For the first time, he saw his son not as a responsibility, not as an inheritance, but as a soul in mourning. That evening, the house grew quiet for the first time in days. Later, as moonlight poured through the patio doors, Edward stood alone in the living room. Maya finished tidying up the nursery behind him. She moved without noise, without expecting thanks.
"Did you lose someone?"
Edward asked suddenly, not turning around.
"Yes," she said. "My mother." He nodded slowly. "That's probably why you knew what he needed." She offered a gentle smile. "It's not about knowing. It's about feeling."
He turned to face her then, his voice softer.
"Stay just until he's okay."
"I'll stay," Maya said for him.
And in the silence that followed, something shifted not just in the room, but in the heart of a grieving home. The following morning dawned quietly over the Carver estate.
Sunlight crept across the polished floors, warming the air that just yesterday had felt cold and heavy. Somewhere deep inside the house, a grandfather clock chimed 8 times, its echo rolling through empty halls like a calm heartbeat. And for the first time in days, the nursery remained silent. Maya stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out the baby's bottle she had used earlier. Her hair was pulled back, her uniform still pressed, though it clung to her with the weight of a restless night.
She hadn't slept. Not really.
After Edward left the nursery in stunned silence, she had stayed there watching the baby sleep, her thoughts tangled in memories of her childhood, of her brother, of the way grief had left them both starving for warmth. A light tap on the marble counter startled her.
It was Mrs. Langford, the head housekeeper, her lips drawn tight in disapproval. "I heard about last night." Maya didn't look up. "I figured you would." Mrs. Langford lowered her voice. "Whatever sympathy you've stirred up with Mr. Carver doesn't change your position. You are here to clean. Nothing more."
"I didn't ask for anything," Maya said calmly. "No, but you're being watched now closely." Langford leaned in, her voice sharpened by years of experience in homes like this.
"People like you don't get second chances in houses like his."
Maya's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. She simply dried the bottle and placed it in the sterilizer, her movements measured, controlled.
Behind her, Edward Carver entered the room. Dressed in a navy sweater and dark jeans. He looked different, less armored, almost human. He paused when he saw the two women.
"Good morning," he said, voice low.
Mrs. Langford stiffened. "Mr. Carver, I was just ensuring the morning schedule is followed precisely." He nodded absently, eyes drifting to Maya. "Did he sleep through the night?" Maya turned to him. "Woke twice. I changed him and sang a little. He settled quickly." Edward nodded slowly.
There was a strange quiet between them. No warmth, but a kind of mutual recognition, like two people who had stood on the same emotional battlefield and emerged changed.
"Good," he said, then hesitated.
"If you're willing, I'd like you to continue tending to him, at least until I can find someone permanent."
Mrs. Langford's lips parted in protest.
"Sir, with all due respect, it's not up for discussion." Edward's voice didn't rise, but it carried weight. Langford swallowed her words.
Maya gave a small nod. "I'll do whatever the baby needs." As Edward left the room, Maya caught a glimpse of something, regret maybe, or relief. She couldn't tell.
Later that day, she stepped into the nursery again, this time with a bottle warmed to just the right temperature. The baby was awake, eyes wide and soft, watching the light play across the ceiling. When he saw her, he didn't cry. His arms reached toward her, small and trusting.
She smiled and whispered, "You remember me, don't you?" As she fed him, Maya's thoughts drifted.
Each movement, each burp, each stroke on his tiny back was natural.
Not rehearsed, not technical, just honest.
She remembered the way her grandmother had cared for her brother after their mother's funeral. Never explaining grief, but never turning away from it either, just being there. From the doorway, Edward watched in silence. He had walked past and paused unintentionally, then stayed longer than intended.
Maya didn't notice at first, but when she did, she didn't stop what she was doing.
"She has your eyes," she said quietly.
Edward blinked. "What?"
The baby. His eyes. They're yours, not hers. No. Edward's jaw tightened. He's all I have left of her. Maya nodded. Then hold on to him with everything. He hesitated. I don't know how. She glanced down. Then start by being present. Even when it's uncomfortable. He didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. A long pause settled between them, filled with soft sounds, the baby's breathing, the wind tapping the window. Later that afternoon, Maya was summoned to the library. It was an imposing room, all oak panels and floor-to-ceiling shelves. Edward sat at the large desk, thumbing through a report, but it was clear he'd been waiting for her. I want to offer you a formal extension, he said, not looking up. A new contract, temporary, but with expanded duties. Maya raised an eyebrow. You want me to be his full-time caregiver? Edward finally looked at her. Until I can find a permanent replacement, Mia crossed her arms. Why not just hire a nurse? I've tried that. They know protocol. You know pain. The honesty caught her off guard. She sat down. What would this new contract include? Access to the nursery, a dedicated room nearby, discretion about what you see and hear in this house, and significantly more pay. Maya studied him for a long moment. You still don't trust me. Not fully. No, he admitted. But I trust what I saw last night. She nodded slowly. Then I accept. As she stood to leave, Edward added, I know this house isn't easy. Not for someone in your position. Maya paused at the door. I don't need easy. I just need honest. And with that, she stepped back into the hall. Not as a maid, not yet as family, but something in between. A stranger the child had accepted, a wound the father might one day heal. And somewhere deep inside, Mia felt the first stirrings of purpose she hadn't known she was missing. Maya's new quarters were small but comfortable just down the hallway from the nursery. The walls were painted a calming blue with a small window that overlooked the east garden. A twin bed, a modest dresser, and a rocking chair made up most of the furnishings. Still, compared to the staff dormitory in the rear wing, it felt like a sanctuary. She sat on the edge of the bed that night, slipping off her shoes slowly, her body aching in that pleasant, purposeful way. The baby had slept longer stretches throughout the day, only stirring when hungry or needing to be changed. No screaming, no thrashing. He had even cooed once. A tiny delicate sound that made Mia's heart flutter. As she turned off the lamp beside her, a voice whispered from the hallway. So, you've made yourself quite at home. Mia turned. It was Grace, the younger of the two nannies, mid-20s, with sleek blonde hair and expensive perfume that lingered in every room she entered. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I'm here for the baby, Maya replied simply. Grace snorted. Don't flatter yourself. You were in the right place at the right time. That doesn't make you qualified. I never claimed to be. You think because he stopped crying in your arms that you've earned something? Trust me, Maya. Mr. Carver gives no one loyalty. Not even his wife had it by the end. Ma's face hardened. That's not something you should say, especially not near his child. Grace raised an eyebrow. You think he's grieving? Please. Edward Carver doesn't grieve, he replaces. Maya stood, walked to the door, and met Grace's gaze without blinking. I'm not here to replace anyone. Least of all someone who can't defend themselves anymore. Grace's smirk faltered. She pushed off the doorframe and disappeared down the hallway, truncated 80,509 characters. In the distance, Edward approached Maya in the nursery. I need to ask you something, he said. She turned. Not about court, not about Julian. Something personal. Mia set the bottle down and met his eyes. I've watched you protect him, guide him, love him like blood, and I know this world won't always see you as his mother, but I do. And if you ever want to be more than just his guardian, he trailed off uncertain. Maya stepped forward. I already am. He didn't speak again, just nodded, eyes glistening. They stood in silence together. The baby nestled between them. As the storm passed yet again, leaving only peace in its wake, and the whisper of justice just over the horizon, the courthouse stood like a monument to solemnity, gray, imposing, and reverent. As Mia stepped from the car that morning, flanked by Edward and Camille, she felt the weight of not just the moment, but the generations it carried. Every stone of the courthouse whispered history, and she was about to carve her name into it. The crowd outside surged with reporters, their questions firing like machine guns. "Miss William, are you prepared to testify? Do you believe Clara Carver was murdered? Do you think justice will prevail today?" Maya kept her gaze forward. Camille raised a hand to deflect them, and Edward gently touched the small of Mia's back as they entered the building. Inside, it was cooler, stiller. Security ushered them into a waiting room, and a clerk handed Mia her badge. "You'll be the second witness," the clerk said after Dr. Rodas. Mia nodded, her fingers brushing the silver chain at her neck, Clara's cross pendant, now a part of her daily armor. In the courtroom, the air buzzed with the tension of long-held secrets preparing to be spoken aloud. Julian Brooks sat at the defendant's table, sharp-suited, his jaw tight, his eyes scanned the room, confident, until they landed on Maya. Then he blinked. She didn't look away. Dr. Rodas testified first. Her voice calm but resolute. She explained the structure of the clinical trials, the patterns of coercion, the undocumented medical experiments. She named hospitals, boards, and private firms that had turned a blind eye. She held up the red drive and identified its contents as the most damning documentation of systemic medical abuse I have ever seen in my career. When Maya's name was called, the room quieted further, not out of politeness, but out of expectation. She walked to the stand, spine straight, steps deliberate. The oath felt heavy in her mouth, but she spoke it clearly. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me, God." The prosecutor began gently. "Miss William, can you describe your relationship to Clara Carver?" Maya took a breath. "I was her employee initially, a housekeeper, but over time, we became close. She trusted me with her son, with her story, with her fears." Did Clara ever express concerns about her husband's company or its practices?" Maya nodded repeatedly. She believed her husband's legal team, particularly Julian Brooks, was involved in shielding unethical experiments performed on infants, particularly black and low-income children. "She showed me files, emails, research logs." She was scared but determined. "Why do you think she chose you to confide in?" Maya hesitated, then answered softly. "Because I didn't dismiss her grief. I listened. I believed her even when it was inconvenient." The defense attorney rose. "Miss William," he began, voice smooth. "You are not a medical professional nor a legal expert. Isn't it true that your involvement in this case is based purely on your interpretation of another woman's claims?" Maya met his gaze. Clara's claims weren't just emotional. They were documented, time-stamped, detailed, and I didn't interpret alone. Experts reviewed them. They were real. But your proximity to Mr. Carver has been noted. Would you describe your relationship as personal?" A ripple moved through the court. Edward sat still, jaw locked. "Yes," Maya said. "It is personal, but not romantic. It's personal because we both lost someone we loved to silence and corruption, and we chose to speak." The defense attorney pressed. "You're aware you've been labeled in the media as manipulative, that some believe you used this tragedy for personal gain." Maya looked at the jury. 12 faces watching, waiting. "I'm aware," she said quietly. "And I'll say this, I've been cleaning houses since I was 17. I've lived in neighborhoods no one would bother to map. I've buried a mother without insurance. And I've held my baby brother through night terrors caused by sirens outside our window. I don't need this moment for validation. I need it for justice." The room held its breath. The judge leaned forward. "Continue." Maya turned to the jury more fully now. Her voice, though calm, filled the room.
Clara Carver died afraid that the people she exposed would bury the truth deeper than her memory. But what she didn't count on, what Julian didn't count on, is that I'm not afraid to be the echo she left behind. I may not have power, but I have presence. I saw the child. I heard the cries. And I refused to be silent. She paused, then said one final line, the one that had become her mantra. Sometimes a child doesn't need perfection, just presence. There was silence. Then the gavel tapped once as the judge called for a recess. Back in the hallway, Edward took her hand tightly. You were perfect, he whispered. I wasn't, she said, voice shaking. But I was present. Camille joined them, eyes bright. The jury felt that you brought Clara back into that room. Hours later, the court reconvened. This time, the prosecution played Clara's final video, the one recorded in the garden, her words unwavering. The room grew pin-drop quiet as she spoke of truth, of justice, of Maya. Julian's face paled. When the video ended, no one moved. The judge's voice broke the silence. We will resume deliberations tomorrow. Court adjourned. Outside, reporters descended again, but this time their tone was different. Miss William, how do you feel after your testimony? Do you believe the jury will convict? Maya paused on the courthouse steps. She looked into the sea of microphones, cameras, voices, and spoke clearly. This wasn't about conviction. This was about visibility. And now Clara is no longer invisible. And with that, she turned, not away, but forward toward whatever justice would come next. The morning of the verdict, the world felt like it held its breath. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had doubled. Some stood with signs bearing Clara's name. Others simply watched with quiet reverence as if witnessing the turning of a page in a long, painful book. Inside, Maya sat between Edward and Camille, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The baby was at home with Mrs. Langford, tucked safely away from the spectacle. Clara's cross pendant, warm from her skin, rested just above her heart. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, expression unreadable. All rise, everyone stood. The jury filed in, eyes straight ahead, solemn. Maya felt her pulse quicken, a quiet storm behind her ribs. The foreman rose. As the jury reached a verdict, the judge asked, "We have your honor." The court clerk approached, took the envelope, and handed it to the judge, who read its contents with careful slowness. Then in a clear deliberate voice he read, in the matter of the United States versus Crabbe Julian Brooks on the charge of conspiracy to conceal illegal medical experimentation. The jury finds the defendant guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge continued, on the charge of obstruction of justice. Guilty. On the charge of falsifying legal records. Guilty. Maya's breath caught. She glanced at Edward. His eyes were glassy, jaw clenched, but his hand found hers, squeezing once firmly. Camille exhaled so hard it was almost a sob. Julian sat frozen, mouth slightly agape. His attorneys whispered urgently, but his eyes never left Maya. He looked as if he'd seen something ancient rise up to claim its due. The judge turned to him. Sentencing will be scheduled in 30 days. Until then, you will remain in federal custody. Guards moved in. Julian didn't resist. He stood slowly, hands behind his back, and was led away through the side door. His power, his arrogance dissolving with each step. The gavel struck once. Court was adjourned. Outside, the crowd erupted, not in celebration, but in something deeper. Relief. Release. Vindication. Maya stepped out into the sunlight, reporters swarming instantly, microphones shoved forward. Miss William, what does this verdict mean to you? She paused, then lifted her chin. It means Clara was right. It means truth outlasts fear. One reporter called out. What comes next? Maya looked over the crowd, her voice steady. Healing, Maya. That evening, the estate was quiet again. Maya walked through the nursery, the baby gurgling as he rolled onto his belly.
She sat beside him, watching his small hands explore the world in the simplest, bravest ways. Edward joined her, sitting on the floor beside them. "He has her eyes," he murmured, "and her courage," Ma said. They sat like that for a while, the sun dipping low outside, the sky streaked with gold and lavender. Later, a quiet gathering filled the estate's garden, just close friends, neighbors, and a few of Clara's colleagues. They stood in a circle around the old magnolia tree, candles in hand. Camille read a poem Clara once loved. Dr. R.H. spoke briefly about what it meant to carry someone else's truth until they could speak again. Then Maya stepped forward. "I was once just a housekeeper," she said. "But Clara didn't see me as invisible. She saw me as capable, as worthy, and in doing so, she gave me more than trust. She gave me a calling." "Master," she turned toward the small plaque now embedded at the base of the tree. "In memory of Clara Carver, truth-teller, mother, warrior," Maya continued. Clara knew something that many forget. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it's whispered by those who've been quiet too long. Sometimes it's carried by hands that clean cribs and hold broken things gently. And sometimes it's found in the love we give to someone else's child. She paused, then added softly, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning of something better." They lowered their candles. The air grew still, reverent. Afterward, back in the nursery, Mia rocked the baby one last time before bed. He looked up at her, eyes drowsy but calm, the weight of the world no longer pressing on his small shoulders. "You're safe now," she whispered. As she stood to leave, Edward called softly from the hallway. "Maya," she turned. He stepped forward, holding a folded paper in his hand. "It's finalized the adoption. I didn't want to presume, but I hoped." Her heart stilled. "You're asking me to be his mother officially, legally. Not just in the way the world sees, but in every way." Tears filled her eyes. She took the paper, unfolded it, saw both their names in his. Clara's son. Her son. Now she looked up at Edward, voice thick with emotion. "Yes. Yes. 1,000 times." He smiled, eyes misting. Later that night, as the estate settled into sleep, Maya stood by the window holding her son, watching the stars pierce through the darkness. She remembered the first time she held him, how he'd stopped crying in her arms. She remembered Clara's final words, and she whispered her own: "Justice is presence, love is defiance, and truth is the legacy we leave behind." The wind rustled the magnolia tree outside, soft and steady. Clara's echo at last had become a voice, and Maya would carry it forward. This story reminds us that true justice is often born not from power or position, but from quiet courage, the kind that listens, stands firm, and refuses to walk away when it would be easier to stay silent. Maya William, a woman once dismissed as invisible, proved that presence can be more powerful than authority, and that love, especially the kind that protects the vulnerable, is a revolutionary act. The legacy of Clara Carver and the resilience of Maya remind us all: when the truth is buried, it only waits for someone brave enough to dig. Sometimes the most extraordinary change begins with an ordinary act of, brought to you by BUP Stories.